Stop by Sherwin-Williams and get 30% off select paints and stains May 2nd through the 12th. It's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Refresh your home inside and out with colors that make every space feel brand new. From cozy interiors to stunning exteriors, we've got the perfect shade for your next project. Shop the sale online or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Greetings, the email read. My name is Orb Robinson from Tampa, Florida. I have in my possession a rare multi-carat moon rock I'm trying to find a buyer for. The laws surrounding this type of exchange are known, so I will be straightforward and nonchalant about wanting to find a private buyer. If you or someone you know would be interested in such an exchange, please let me know. Thank you, Orb Robinson. Axel Emmerman figured this had to be a joke. Some dude with an obviously fake name was asking him if he wanted to buy some moon rocks. Moon rocks. It may be the most valuable thing on Earth. There were a finite amount of them and were only allowed out of NASA's hands for highly regulated scientific research. Otherwise, they resided in a hermetically sealed, glove-handled existence of pure nitrogen, touched only by those in oxygen-canistered, full-bodied, purified clean suits in the Lunar lab, which nestled deep within the Johnson Space Center's well-guarded and highly secure mega-compound. Even researchers got only the tiniest bits of rock to work on, and only under specific conditions. And then they had to return them, albeit damaged a tad from being exposed, however briefly, to Earth's atmosphere. And really, Emmerman knew that nobody had access to those things, so they could hawk them like ubiquitous Roman coins on the international marketplace. But sure enough, that's what the email said. It had been addressed to everyone in his rock and mineral collecting club in Antwerp. Like they had the kind of money that could afford such contraband. And what if this Orb Robinson, was that some kind of weird derivation of the name of that R&B singer-songwriter from the 1950s and 60s, Roy Orbison? The guy who wrote Pretty Woman. You know, dark hair, pasty, sunglasses. Though, it was oddly relevant since Orbison, who died tragically in 1988, had briefly studied geology. The guy who penned this moon rock inquiry was a smartass, emphasis on the smart. And the guy had probably gotten Axel's email address from the internet via the webpage for the Antwerp Mineral Club, where he had been a charter member for more than 3 decades earlier. But Orb had made a mistake. These guys he emailed knew their rocks, or knew people who could tell them if the outer space rocks had been delivered to Earth by meteorite instead of by human hands. In the world of commerce, the first were valuable, but the second, well, they were invaluable. Emmerman himself had been a rock guy since he was a little boy, and he loved them, collected them, studied them, and could not understand anyone who didn't. He knew that the only moon rocks in existence on this planet were the 842 pounds that had been collected by the 12 American men who had walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972. They knew that geologists had had a hard time convincing NASA to even collect rocks while they were there, but had prevailed. Training took place in West Texas where astronauts, these guys were test pilots, not rock hounds, were taught field geology. The rock lugging had paid off. from a CBS newscast.
Some of what researchers have learned has been stunning. For example, the moon and Earth have a common ancestry. And because of the rocks, we now know that the moon is about 4.5 billion years old, around the same age as the Earth.
Apollo 17 had even brought Harrison Schmitt, an honest-to-God geologist, along to walk on the lunar surface and not just to marvel. In time, a certain few of the moon rocks were designated as public relations rocks to be occasionally exhibited in the world's museums. But the number of people who could get their hands on them, even to so much as touch them, was a very short list. Axel Emmerman knew in his heart of hearts that Orb Robinson was not likely one of them. The guy selling them was either nuts or a fraudster. Oh wait, there's one other choice, thought the Belgian. If this guy really had moon rocks, he was a thief.
A crime is a crime. No matter how you put it, if you're trying to defraud people, you're a criminal.
Turns out that's true even if the crime itself sounds like something from a bad sci-fi novel. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Remy. You know, I'm a big believer in taking care of your teeth.
Yeah, you are.
So I'm good about brushing and flossing and all of that stuff, but the most damaging thing I do to my teeth happens when I'm asleep. I grind my teeth at night, and I can't do anything to stop it because I'm unconscious when it happens.
Well, it's a good thing Remy is a sponsor now.
Indeed. If you are part of the 30% of Americans who grind your teeth, there's no better solution to protect your smile than Remy's Custom Fit Night Guard. Remy is 80% less than a dentist and way easier. Here's how it works. You get your impression kit delivered straight to your door. Remy gives you step-by-step instructions to get the perfect impression.
And then they send your night guard back to you and you start protecting your teeth?
That's right. Now, I still grind, but night guards protect from damage caused by grinding. And these ones are made in the U.S. Remy is so confident you'll get a perfect fit that they offer a 45-night perfect fit guarantee or your money back.
Really?
No waiting rooms, no overpriced bills, just a better way to protect your teeth while you sleep. Try Remy risk-free at shopremy.com/COTC and use code COTC to get up to 50% off your night guard at checkout. That's 50% off at shopremi.com/COTC with code COTC.
Thank you, Remy, for sponsoring this episode.
Thad Roberts was born in 1977, raised in a strict Mormon household. He seemed hell-bent on doing almost everything the hard way. When he was shipped off to be trained to be a Mormon missionary at 19, he made the mistake of unburdening his conscience to the mission president. He desperately wanted to be worthy of the church and the work he would do for them, and he wanted to be purged of his knowledge of a particular sin he had committed before he took on the important job of missionary work. He had sinned, he confessed, looking for some kind of penance from the church. He'd had sex with his girlfriend, Katie Wilson, without the benefit of matrimony. These Mormons were not particularly keen on offering penance. They quickly threw him out. So did his parents, who believed he was destined for hell. At just 19, then, he married Katie, and they did what millions before them have done, made it work with part-time jobs, big dreams, and each other at their side, while drowning in student debt and a very real lack of clarity about what they wanted to do with their lives. A year or so later, Katie got a full-time job as a dental assistant and part-time model. Thad was slogging through to get a degree he barely cared about. To what end, he wondered. At the university center one day, Thad perused the files labeled with professional work options. Lawyer, physical therapist, teacher. Nothing clicked. Then he picked up the one labeled astronaut. This was a bazinga moment. He knew this was it. He had found what he wanted to do. But he would have to start over, studying the right things this time. Now he could be hyper-focused and singularly engaged. He told his wife. According to Ben Mesrick, the New York Times reporter who later wrote about Thad, Katie listened and then said, "Cool, I guess I'm going to need to get another job." Soon enough, Thad had sketched out his to-do list to be an astronaut who would go to Mars. This is Mesrick talking to Book TV.
He changed his whole life and kind of became James Bond, and he majored in geology and physics and astronomy at University of Utah, and he learned how to fly airplanes and scuba dive and spoke 5 languages.
Thad founded the university's Astronomical Society, hosting regular Friday night parties at the observatory there to keep the society from becoming too nerdy. At those, he later wrote, the idea was to, quote, bring the wonders and beauty of the sky to many curious and exploring minds through tales of mythological events, real-time experience with the moon, the planets M13, the Ring Nebula, the Dunbell Nebula, and more, end quote. You know, less a party than a freewheeling student seminar where the kids could quietly sit atop the observatory, drink beer, and talk stars. He was chair of the Study Advisory Committee in the Physics Department and was a volunteer at the Utah Museum of Natural History. He got his private pilot's license, scoring a high performance rating. He got certified in open water scuba diving. He and Katie even went fossil digging on the weekends with the university's paleontology enthusiasts and were in on the excavation of the first T-Rex ever found in Utah. He started learning languages, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, because you never know who's going to be on that voyage to Mars with you. All the while, making the rest of us look like absolute slugs in the brains, gumption, and wakefulness department. Did I mention he was at 6 foot tall, also athletic, good-looking, and raised $10,000 for cystic fibrosis by biking from Salt Lake City to San Francisco? And apologies, but geez, leave something for the rest of us. In his junior year of his new degree programs at Utah, he applied to be part of NASA's highly renowned and hard-to-get-into co-op program, a kind of feeder internship for the space program, an initial sorting out of America's top science prospects while they were still genius undergrads who shared the dream that Thad had. Based in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, the NASA co-op program loved Thad, and he loved them, despite the fact that he would have to leave Katie for months at a time back in Utah. Set up to be a 3-year program, the successful applicant would spend 3 months at NASA, then return to his or her school for coursework, then return again to NASA to work on various projects they'd shown interest in. Thad got assigned to one of the most elite labs there, something called Astromaterials. It was exciting and stressful and unreal to Thad, who only wanted to make the best impression. He told CBS News,
I had worked so hard to get there on the hope that I was going to get there. And then when I got accepted, it's now, I got to keep this up. So it's kind of stressful to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to outperform? How am I going to learn as much as possible and take advantage of all this without the kind of money that everyone else has?
The co-op whiz kids became a close-knit bunch who worked hard and played together on the weekends. It was during those weekends that Thad was soon recognized as their social leader, a super smart guy who craved adventure and wasn't afraid of taking risks, like jumping off cliffs or kayaking fast-moving rivers, or skydiving or hiking the wilds of Big Bend. He even introduced a competition of sorts among the co-ops to outdo one another in the JSC Adventure category. He was the first to somehow sneak into the Space Shuttle simulator when an actual simulation, complete with mission control chatter and real astronauts in the seats, took place. He'd shown up at the right time, having followed others in, assumed to be an observer, and boom, he was part of the action. There was almost no topping that. He liked the adrenaline rush. He liked being popular, something that was relatively new to him. He liked this new guy he had created for NASA. The only downside was that he and Katie grew slowly apart. What with his dreams and his adventures, not like her existence as a boring Utah dental assistant, hanging out with other low-level models who were trying to get booked for jobs that paid. Thad was on the fast track. He made sure he was making the right impression with the people that counted. They were the ones, he knew, who would determine his fate. If he did the work, if he showed up at all the right seminars, asked good questions, and made himself available for extra work, he was that much closer to getting to Mars. One man he knew he had to cozy up to was Dr. Everett Gibson, someone Robert's biographer Mesrick described as, quote, the epitome of the old-school NASA scientist, end quote. Gibson got to NASA just after the first landing on the moon and, with his doctorate in geochemistry, was the moon rock guy, one of the first men charged with prepping and storing the most valuable substance anywhere. He was the guy who looked for signs of life, for unknown elements, for possible pathogens. You know, anything we hadn't seen before, wouldn't want to invite in if it was gonna, say, kill us. It had been years since the gathered moon rocks had been considered deadly, though, or even dangerous, but they were still precious and valuable and irreplaceable objects of scientific and philosophic desire. Early on, Thad had a chance to introduce himself to Gibson after one of the scientist's work-time lectures. Thad had been enchanted by a small piece that Gibson had shown that day as it rested in a glass vial. It was ALH 84001. Here's Gibson talking in 2011 at the Mars Society Annual Convention.
We had a rock that was recovered in 1984. This rock had a crystallization age of 4.09 billion years old. We found out that 4 billion years ago, groundwater began interacting with this rock. The groundwater formed carbonates. These carbonates moved through this rock. As the water was retreated, it left behind the carbonates, containing phases which were transported by the water. 16 million years ago, an impact occurred on Mars. Kicked in space, traveled, landed on Earth 13,000 years ago in Antarctica.
Gibson says the rock suggests the possibility of life on Mars. After Gibson presented his spiel to Thad, he asked Thad if he was enjoying himself. Thad said he'd never felt more alive. Thad continued to work to be seen, eventually earning himself a place at a regular weekly lunch at an Indian restaurant of a select few. Thad's lunch companions included Gibson, another esteemed geologist, a premier NASA physicist, a renowned astronomer, and a high-level NASA aerospace engineer. Mesrick wrote, quote, if Thad had walked into any bookstore in the country and looked up popular books on Mars, he would have found their names, end quote. Thad was the only co-op invited. He must have impressed them not just with his scientific mind and rigor, but with his youthfulness and tales of high adventure. He was them 30 years prior, and that must have been appealing to them, to hear his stories, to have him listen to theirs for the first time. When Katie came to visit, Thad made a point of introducing her to Dr. Gibson, who, in turn, invited them to lunch and to a quick tour of his lab. When there, he excused himself to open the safe to show Katie something special. The couple was asked to wait. Thad and Katie hung back in the hallway, but Thad, curious, leaned in a little bit to better see how Gibson was getting into the safe. When Gibson asked them to come through, he gave a small vial to Katie. It contained a small rock. Delighted and shocked, she asked if it was a moon rock. Gibson laughed. He explained moon rocks were too valuable to give away and that the procedure to even use them for research purposes was an arduous process that involved proposals and peer reviews and constant monitoring. And, he said, quote, there aren't any more, and there aren't going to be any more. It wouldn't even be legal for me to own a moon rock. The ones I have in my safe, I've acquired over 30 years of research proposals, and when I retire, they'll go back to the lunar vault. End quote. What the geologist had given the pretty wife of a NASA intern was a low-level meteorite. Thad was ecstatic, Katie was honored. Gibson shook off their emphatic gratitude. He said, it's our job to inspire young people like yourselves. It would not be long before he would realize his error in choosing Thad to inspire. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Ollie. If your dog could talk, they'd beg for Ollie.
I don't even want to think about most of what our dogs would say if they could talk. But yes, begging for Ollie would definitely be on the list.
Ollie is clean, fresh nutrition for your dog. You don't have to be a veterinary nutritionist to know that feeding your dog real whole foods with minimal processing is one of the best choices you can make for their health. A perfectly portioned whole fresh food diet has been proven to extend your pup's life by 2.5 years.
Who doesn't want more time with their best friend?
Right? So here's how it works. You fill out Ollie's 30-second quiz, and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, activity level, and other health info.
Ollie crunches the numbers and recommends the right recipes and daily portions for your precious pup based on hundreds of thousands of real dog results.
Ollie offers 3 meal plans to choose from, so you can choose between a full fresh plan, fresh topper plan, or a mixed plan with their freshly baked recipes for your special fur baby.
They also have treats and supplements.
Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/COTC, tell them all about your dog, and use code COTC to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back.
That's OLLIE.com/COTC and enter code COTC to get 60% off your first box.
The members of the Antwerp Mineral Club talked about the odd email they'd all received at their next meeting. They almost all laughed at the notion, then deleted the email. Axel Emmerman was not laughing. He believed he was witnessing a crime in progress, a crime against humanity, a crime against rocks. He decided to respond to the intriguing email. In part, it read, quote, "I might be interested if the price is right. Have you any proof that the goods are what you say they are?" End quote. Thad Roberts could not believe he had found a buyer. It had been a lark, sort of, a bit of whimsical thinking, because he had nothing to sell this guy, but he did have an idea on how to get it. Weeks earlier, a bit randomly, he had been offered the fortuitous opportunity to help Dr. Andrea Cooper do a bit of inventory on the moon rocks. How random? If he had gone to lunch that day or had been in some other department, the opportunity would have gone to someone else. But Dr. Cooper had come into his lab and asked him. He had then been escorted by Dr. Cooper and her keys and codes into the Lunar samples lab, shown how to don his bodysuit, complete with gloves and boots, led through a room that was designed to clean out dust particles that might be in your lungs, through several high-security doors, and then through the lab to a vault, like the kind you would find in a Swiss bank. The kind, Thad was told, that could withstand a pound of C4 plastic explosives. Once in, there were more access codes, and then into a room with rows of cabinets that contained about 110,000 samples, some the size of micron dust, which I'm gonna guess is mighty small. Thad was going to handle moon rocks. Asked by Mo Rocca, who was reporting for the CBS program Sunday Morning what that was like, Thad said,
It's inspirational, it's motivating, it's awe-inspiring.
Thad, overawed but aware of what was all around him, asked about a door that led to another room in the vault. He asked Cooper what was in there. Those were the quote-unquote return samples, that is, about 17 pounds of rocks that had been sent out by NASA to be used by other scientists and then returned. They were no longer considered clean enough for NASA work. Cooper said they were, quote, basically considered trash, end quote. Author Mesrick.
So when he gets to NASA and he sees all these moon rocks in a safe that aren't being used, they're the most valuable thing on Earth, and NASA is just putting them in a corner, he feels that the right thing to do is to take these out of NASA, to take these moon rocks and use them.
Thad remembered that Gibson had once remarked that someone had tried to sell a single gram of moon rock for something like $5 million. Thad did the math. Those 17 pounds were worth something like $40 billion. Now, consider Thad's position, his intellect, his curiosity. This was a cool game he could play in his head that summer of 2001. If he was going to steal these rocks, hypothetically, how would he do it? He went through every step, considering how to get around the locks, through the doors, into the vault. He worked on the problem as if it was his doctoral dissertation. Think it through, identify the problems, solve them one by one. Then he had sent that email, a game really, that would prompt an imaginary heist. Then Emmerman's return mail query had shown up. This was becoming real. Meanwhile, Axel Emmerman had sent another email. This was to the FBI office in Tampa. He wrote that he suspected a swindle and indicated he'd be willing to help the agency in any way possible, as in he could pretend to be interested in the buy. Thus began negotiations between Axel and Thad about quantity and price. Separate negotiations were occurring between Axel and the FBI. Once the FBI figured out that this was real, how much the rocks were worth, and what kind of crime was being committed here, the agency decided to ask Axel to say he couldn't fly to Florida because he was busy at work. Instead, would it be okay if a relative met Orb to get some kind of verification that the rocks were indeed from the moon, and then, if they were, hand over the agreed-upon sum of $100,000? 100 grand? For rocks worth millions? Thad had thought there was no point in being greedy, and really, what random rock collector had millions to spare? And this game was fun. Thad liked it. It kept his mind working day and night, but he could hardly tell his friends about it. Even his best buddy at the JSC, also a co-op, Shay Lynn Sauer, didn't know. Not yet. Thad waffled. He needed something or someone to help him decide what to do. He didn't even tell Katie. He returned to Utah for a semester, realized his marriage was now all but over, and mulled the heist. Back in Houston in the summer of 2002, he met 22-year-old Tiffany Fowler, fellow co-op intern, an aspiring biologist, while on one of the adventure weekends for the co-ops to get to know each other. This was her first year, his third in the program. I'll skip the details, but the two found something in each other that was both immediate and life-altering. They slept together almost from the first day, so full of that urgent kind of young love that is all-consuming. Within 2 weeks, he told her and best friend Sauer about his big heist idea. Unbelievably, they both wanted in. Later, Thad would say he did it for love, to prove that he would, in the worst pun ever, give Tiffany the moon.
In my own head, stealing something wasn't the way I looked at it. We weren't going to take this money we're getting from it to go buy a yacht or lots of cars or a big house. We were going to live just a small kind of lifestyle we were, but fund science that might change the world.
Thad was unquestionably a genius, but God, was he dumb.
I mean, the simple answer is to say that I did it for love. I did it because I wanted to be loved. I wanted someone to know that I literally cared about them that much, and to have the symbol there to remind them of it.
And so the three immediately put Thad's plan into action. It was July 2002. First thing, Thad borrowed a friend's Jeep Cherokee, then changed out the plates with another car in a random strip center. To get into the JSC compound was easy. They already had NASA IDs. Working together, they approached Building 31 where the rocks were stored. It was late at night and pouring rain. People worked late, so none of the security people would find a car parked close by as unusual. Next, having already established a way to walk close to Building 31's hallway's edges, they could evade any closed-circuit cameras trained on them. The plan was for Thad and Tiffany to be on the inside with Shay in the car, monitoring the CC cameras, which they had hacked into. They managed to get access to the building because, a few days earlier, Thad had called one of his Monday lunch club professor buddies and simply asked him for the code. It's amazing what sensitive info people can get their hands on just by asking nicely. Putting on suits, fitted with tanks complete with 15 minutes of oxygen as the Moonrock Vault had no oxygen for preservation purposes, they entered the Lunar lab, ready to use his insider vault code and simply walk in. To continue further, they had another entry barrier which used a digital code access. Thad had managed to use some kind of illumination that showed bodily oils as deposited on keys. The most oils were left on the first digit. The numbers used in the code each successfully had less and less oil deposits on them. He simply punched in accordingly. And boom, they were in the Lunar lab. He walked up to a safe and began to spin the wheel lock, but it didn't open. He tried it over and over to no avail. Then it dawned on Thad that, in his excitement and confusion, he was not standing in the Lunar lab at all, and this was not the right safe. He was in Everett Gibson's lab, in front of the safe that, yes, also held moon rocks, and that one great evidence of life on Mars meteorite. The excitement and terror of the heist and his efforts to keep Tiffany calm had somehow led to this confusing moment. He would have to make do. Thad remembered that Gibson had a piece of paper taped to the top of the safe that held the safe's combination. He tried that, and maybe this should have been a sign, but that code didn't work. Maybe it was an algorithm or some mathematical puzzle, which, frankly, Thad didn't have time to figure out. Little aside, it turned out to be numbers you had to square root and multiply, apparently. I mean, scientists. So Thad, knowing that their oxygen was running out, grabbed a dolly and shoved the 600-pound safe onto it, and he and Tiffany waltzed very carefully out of the lab and out of Building 31 and down the Space Center's long entrance with its 15-mile-per-hour speed limit past the guards, who barely noticed them. It was raining cats and dogs. Why bother? They switched the license plates back in the strip mall, no one the wiser. Then they went carefully home to index their haul, marveling at the rocks and how they had all done the impossible. Things were moving quickly now. The heist had been on a Saturday. In 6 days, they would drive to Orlando to meet Axel Emmerman's in-laws, and the rest of Thad and Tiffany's life could begin. The meet was set for July 20th, 2002, the 33rd anniversary of the first time man walked on the moon. Thad and Tiffany drove the 14 hours from Houston to Orlando and got a room at the Sheraton, where they decided to take a quick nap before the fateful meeting at the Italian restaurant just 2 blocks away. When Tiffany briefly left the bedroom, Thad decided to initiate his own celebration. Here's him talking to a CBS reporter.
I take some of the moon rocks and I put them underneath the blanket in the bed.
You have sex on the moon rocks?
Yeah. I never said anything, but I'm sure she could feel it. She never said anything directly either, but it was more about the symbol of what we were doing, basically having sex on the moon.
One small step for man, I guess. The plan was for Thad to go alone to the restaurant, wait at the table for the sister-in-law, a woman named Lynn Briley. Her real name was FBI Special Agent Lynn Billings, and she was a geologist. Then Tiffany and Gordon McWhorter, a friend and a felon from Utah who only had the vaguest idea of what was going on, but who had first helped Thad send out his queries, would join them. It was going fine. Thad sat down, Billings joined him a few minutes later. They chatted amicably. Both were excited. Thad would later say that he noticed that everyone in the restaurant was an adult, middle-aged even, but he figured there was a convention in town or something that catered to that clientele. He did not imagine that they were all, with the exception of the hostess, feds. It's not that he was entirely oblivious to the danger. In one of the FBI transcripts, Thad reportedly said to Agent Billings, "If you're wearing a wire, I'm screwed." FBI stings are not glamorous affairs, but it went according to plan. Thad said the goods were in the hotel. Lynn said the money was in her briefcase. She excused herself to call her husband Kurt, Axel's alleged brother, to give him the "things are going well" message. Then Thad and Tiffany met Kurt in the parking lot, where it was decided that Kurt would ride with Billings and Thad. Tiffany and Thad's friend Gordon would follow in the car they'd brought to the restaurant. They didn't get out of the parking lot. Guns were drawn, orders yelled, a helicopter was overhead. Thad was forced out of the car and onto his knees to be cuffed. Axel Emmerman, waiting to hear what was happening at his home in Antwerp, got a phone call from the Tampa Herald asking for comment. FBI Special Agent Nick Nance, who worked the case, shook his head when asked about the criminal mastermind Thad Roberts.
My impressions of Thad are that he was a very bright, motivated student. One of his goals was to be an astronaut, and I think he had his foot in the door with NASA, was well on his way to reaching that goal, and then this one greedy event, he threw his life away in one fell swoop.
The remaining 3 co-conspirators were immediately arrested. The government had a hard time determining exactly what the stolen property was worth, but settled on $21 million. Everett Gibson asked repeatedly for the return of some green notebooks that had been inside a safe, but none of the 3 remembered seeing them when they took the safe, nor when they cleaned it out, dismantled it, and put the contents in a dumpster. It would be, in hard numbers, the greatest loss incurred during the heist, as the rocks were returned, of course, though they were now classified as NASA trash. On September 21, 2002, Tiffany and Sauer pleaded guilty in a United States magistrate court in the Middle District of Florida to charges of conspiracy to commit theft and interstate transportation of stolen goods. Tiffany got 6 months home confinement. Sauer got 36 months probation and a $7,000 fine. The following day, Thad also pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his crimes. Pretty quickly, Thad and Katie divorced, to no one's surprise. The first 2 years in prison, deprived of the outdoors that he had loved and the woman that he loved and the future he'd been so close to having, Thad floundered. Talking to a post-prison talk show, Prison Professors, Thad told the host, someone with whom he had been in prison, that he was overcome with shame and knew it was right that people had abandoned him. Then he decided to make some use of, let's call it his downtime. He asked for books on astronomy, physics, philosophy, quantum mechanics, geology, and such. He was his own doctoral program.
I'd read for several hours every day. I'd go run around the track and go work out, and I'd come back and write. And I was focused on trying to explore the mysteries of physics. And it turns out that pretty much every major physicist I know could probably use a good 6-year sabbatical.
On February 12, 2005, Thad Roberts received a 10-month reduction in sentence. According to an appeals court, he had been given more time by the judge than guidelines permitted. Roberts took the opportunity to apologize to Gibson, who had lost his research in the robbery.
He's an incredibly complex character. And I've written about Mark Zuckerberg. I've always been writing about these genius kids who live in that gray area between right and wrong. And here's this kid who basically does a 100-yard sprint through that gray area right into the black area. And I don't know why.
Despite his "I did it for love" posturing, I'm not convinced Thad truly knows why either. To some, Thad Roberts is the ultimate redemption story. He is a well-respected theoretical physicist who, and I'm going to quote Thad's internet bio here, quote, explores the possibility that quantum mechanics is not exact, but is, instead, an accurate approximation of a deeper deterministic theory, end quote. If you understand that, yay you. He is now a TEDx speaker who explores the mysteries of modern physics, taking a particular interest in the philosophical posture of Bohmian mechanics, the superfluid vacuum. Today, he works for a private think tank, which is financing his research into grand unified theory, which, as I read further, is a candidate theory for quantum gravity? I don't know. He wrote a book called Einstein's Intuition, in which he argues you have to think in 11 dimensions to understand it. I'm going to go ahead and agree with him. But it raises a question how this 11 dimensions guy could have thought that selling moon rocks on the internet was exemplary criminal behavior. And most children over 6 would know that's not a good plan. Anyway, know that a few new moon rocks are now in humanity's possession, while the ones he stole are considered trash because of the contamination he exposed them to. In February 2024, Audacious, a robotic lander said to be the size of a telephone book, remember those, landed on the moon's surface. It was built by Houston-based Intuitive Machines at the behest of NASA, which hired the firm to transport instruments to send back data in advance of the next manned flight to land there, scheduled for 2026. In late June 2024, the China National Space Administration's unmanned Chang'e 6 lander brought back the first ever pieces of the moon's unexplored dark side. Everett Gibson is still alive and considered an emeritus scientist at the Space Center. The green notebooks he said were stolen when the safe was removed from his office have never shown up. 30 years of research, his life's work, really, were lost. In one court filing against Thad, the government explained that, quote, the research had not been published elsewhere and could not be replicated, end quote. That essentially made it priceless, of course, but in real hard costs, the government said Gibson's laboratory had lost a concrete $200,000 in funding since the debacle. In lectures, Gibson disputes some of the facts that Thad and author Mesrick have repeatedly presented. He says their tales make things sound much more romantic than they really were, and contends that Thad gained access to the lab knowing all along that he wanted to steal the rocks to make Katie happy and erase their student debt. He contends that Thad even asked a University of Utah professor where and how to sell lunar samples. Gibson even questions whether Thad and Tiffany had sex in the bed, with the moon rocks as mattress cover. That detail sure sounds sexy. That's why Mesrick's book is titled Sex on the Moon, and it's probably why I'm going to title this episode the same. Gibson, however, doesn't think that encounter ever happened. He quotes Tiffany and Sauer, the friend-turned-accomplice, as saying the fornication was much more pedestrian. The two just had sex in the shower. Gibson's anger is palpable.
The bottom line is how to steal a moon rock? Don't, unless you want 7 to 10 in federal prison.
NASA has reworked its security post-heist. Naturally, they've been reticent to give details. If Thad is going to make it to the moon, it will not be with their blessing. He has his hopes on that score pinned on the private space industry. Good guy Axel Emmerman was, after alerting the FBI, consulted during the agency's investigation about what the moon rocks would look like. The agency resisted asking anyone at NASA for fear that insiders would find out about the inquiry and that would tip off the offender, whom they strongly suspected was from within the Space Center. Emmerman was thanked handily for all his efforts on their behalf.
He was given a Belgian flag that was flown to the moon on Apollo 16, a little small 3-inch by 4-inch flag, Belgian flag. International Astronomical Union named an asteroid for him. This is quite an honor. FBI gave him recognition, his mineral club gave something, but I think the neatest thing is Axel came out with a lunar rock. Because there are lunar samples that have been collected on the Earth from some of the desert regions, and a mineral collector that had some gave Axel a 3-gram sample.
For Axel, that was better than any amount of money they could have thrown at him. There's one more thing. Thad had written letters to Tiffany while he was incarcerated. Her father had forbidden her to go see him, but they were allowed to speak once. At that time, she had given him her sister's address so he could write her without her parents' knowledge. Thad, ever the romantic, waxed poetic about his love for her and how the thought of her kept him alive. She did not write back, but he kept writing, showering her with his poetry and his dreams. Then one day, a box came for him, something guards inspected and then put into his cell. It was all of his letters addressed to Tiffany. They had not been opened. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read Sex on the Moon, the amazing story behind the most audacious theft in history. She read stories about Thad Roberts and the crime in the Houston Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, and the New York Times. She also reviewed some excerpts from the copious FBI files related to the case, which are now online. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.